With the recent release of Five Nights at Freddy's Secret of the Mimic, and everything that the game brought with it regarding the lore, we're now back to piecing everything together and finally putting to bed the entire book debate that's been ongoing since Fazbear Frights book number 1, Into the Pit, marking the end of a long battle of trying to figure out if the short stories were directly canon or not, and now we know they aren't. So, being in a similar situation with the Charlie trilogy, we pretty much are back to using whatever new info is shown to us to help piece together certain things in the game's timeline that was never elaborated on, but also means we aren't able to do anything more than that since they're completely separate continuities from each other. I have quite a few thoughts on that and I'll cover it in a separate video. However, the main thing I want to discuss is regarding the White Tiger. The White Tiger is basically David's plush in the form of an actual mascot costume, a one-of-one suit that is not seen anywhere else in the factory and is only seen very briefly whenever it decides to show itself to scare the player, then disappear back into the void, hearing children's laughter coming from it. And then the only other time where we're actually up against it, it actively causes hallucinations and teleports, taking advantage of the darkness as the opportunity to move. But yet the movements it decides to make, they're very subtle and not lively. The thing that has bothered me about the White Tiger is that this is the only character to be capable of causing this type of paranormal activities inside MCM, with even the Mimic being incapable of causing hallucinations, so already right off the bat the White Tiger isn't normal. Which ultimately brings me to talk about the Mimic short story for a bit, because I had a theory that originally emphasized the connection between David and his tiger plush from the Tales from the Pizzaplex storyline, because some of the elements we see here are most likely being reused in the game's timeline. The original topic point I had for a scrapped complete Mimic story video focused on how David's tiger plush was basically his everything. David would carry the plush everywhere he went. Edwin carved a bed frame mimicking Tiger, and then David made a makeshift version of Tiger for the Mimic. The emphasis on how emotionally attached David was to the tiger plush was most definitely intentional, also taking into account how at the beginning of the story the first line is "Daddy, I'm a ghost," and how by the end of the story after David dies, the Mimic started carrying around David's tiger plush, and Edwin had ended up taking it away and crying into it at some point during the fugue. With the Mimic taking the opportunity to start acting like David after his death, which inevitably led to Edwin's violent attack on it, I think it's most likely David's memories after his death most likely ended up finding a place on the tiger plush, which brings us back to Secret of the Mimic because of how we see the White Tiger acting like a ghost. A semi-physical White Tiger mascot costume is now actively roaming the MCM facility, and we are once again seeing how important the White Tiger plush is in the story because it's the key item to know how you not only do the secret ending, they are also pushing the White Tiger's importance to David because of the family portrait we see during the finale portion of the game in one of the film reel tapes, which if anything pushes how important plushies are in the story because this isn't the first time we see something like this where plushies ended up being the reason why a spirit can stick around still, which brings us to the bite victim in Five Nights at Freddy's 4. With the FNAF 1 cast and then also Fredbear, plushies being pretty much his only friends and also his guide, and also with how emotionally attached he was to these plushies that even after the bite occurred, we are shown a scene with him and his friends, which not only plays to the benefit of Shatter Victim, but also basically outright shows that a plush can be used for a spirit to be bound to the world still by memories being attached to plushies, and those memories later also haunting the actual FNAF 1 animatronics and Golden Freddy suits. And the only way the bite victim was able to be put to rest was when the MCI was brought together, reattached the bite victim's shattered memories and having his happiest day, allowing him to finally be freed and to rest. However, the big difference with the White Tiger was that David's emotional connection to this one single plush was basically capable of creating a Golden Freddy-like figure, something that isn't technically physically there but also is, which is how we see Golden Freddy act in the FNAF movie, so it's safe to say the way they act is pretty much very alike. But going back to discussing plushies in the FNAF story, something that happens in Help Wanted and Help Wanted 2 also brings up the importance of plushies again, because we not only see a glitch trap plush show up after the transfer into Vanessa is completed, pretty much being left up in the air about why that happened, it gets answered in Help Wanted 2, with Cassie's dad having to collect digital memory plushies, being Charlie and the MCI in order to play Princess Quest 4, where we trade our Vanny mask for Glitchtrap's memory plush, handing it over to Vanny, which transforms the plush back into what remained of the virus with Vanny crushing him, ending Glitchtrap permanently. So ultimately, this gives me a lot of confidence in how important plushies are going to be for the future of the story, but also how important they were already in the past with the existence of the White Tiger. But as for what his purpose ultimately really is for the story, the White Tiger is most likely going to be following the Mimic wherever it goes, because the White Tiger at its core is still David's memories, and when M1, aka the program that is mimicking Fiona, was inside of the Mimic body, it pretty much was David's mother after his real mom died at Fall Fest, and she stayed as his parental figure until David inevitably died. But as we know, M1 was eventually moved into the MXES machine after Edwin's multiple failed attempts at trying to create M1 and the Mimic. As he tried to bring David back, it all failed, leaving an unfinished M2 program inside of the Mimic body. Edwin eventually abandons M1 Fiona after realizing that M1 wasn't really Fiona and traps her in the MXES machine deep below ground. And as we see M2 in the game, it remains incapable of locking itself into one personality. It had mimicked David, but Edwin didn't like that it was copying David, and he beat it and most likely locked it away somewhere in MCM, where it eventually escaped, as seen with Moon.exe, which makes White Tiger's existence more tragic because his son was still around. The White Tiger is most likely gonna be following the Mimic endoskeleton for as long as it thinks its mom is still inside of it, or maybe it'll stick around the MXES machine, but pretty much the main point wraps around to that wherever the story goes from here, the White Tiger is the new Golden Freddy of the modern FNAF storyline. But of course, that's just a theory, a silly FNAF theory about a game I really enjoyed and considered my favorite FNAF game now. Thanks for watching!